Marcus Mac Thompson crouched behind a display case containing what the placard claimed was Napoleon's spare underwear. Wondering how his life had reached this particular low point, breaking into the Luna City Military Museum hadn't been his first choice for paying off 17 different creditors, but desperate times called for desperately stupid measures. "Okay, Mac, you got this," he whispered to himself, eyeing the gleaming Rigelian pulse crystals across the hall. "Grab the shiny alien stuff, fence it to Constantine's crew, pay off Jimmy the wrench before he turns your kneecaps into abstract art." Simple plan. What he hadn't counted on was the museum's AI curator deciding 3 in the morning was the perfect time for a complete historical inventory. "Good evening, unauthorized visitor," came a cheerfully British voice from every speaker in the building. "I am Winston, Warfare Intelligence Network Storage and Tactical Operations Nerd, at your service. Might I suggest you reconsider your current course of action? The Rigelian crystals you're eyeing are replicas. The real ones were sold to fund our excellent cafeteria upgrade." The back froze. "Great, just great. I'm being lectured by a computer with a superiority complex." "Actually, it's more of an intellectual enthusiasm complex, but I appreciate the feedback. However, if you're interested in genuinely valuable historical artifacts, might I direct your attention to our Civil War collection? Specifically, the 1863 Springfield rifle in Case 7. Absolutely fascinating piece. Did you know it was manufactured during the same week as the Battle of Gettysburg? I don't care if it was made during the same week as my grandmother's birthday. I need something I can sell, not something that belongs in a history book." That's when every news screen in the museum suddenly blazed to life with breaking news alerts. "This is Amanda Torres with Unbreaking News. We're receiving reports of massive alien vessels appearing throughout the solar system. I repeat, we are not alone, and apparently our new neighbors are not here for a friendly visit." The main screen showed a ship that looked like someone had crossed a cathedral with a particularly aggressive sea urchin, bristling with weapons that probably had names in languages human throats couldn't pronounce. Standing on the bridge, visible through some kind of holographic projection, was a being that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a tax auditor. "Citizens of Earth." The creature announced in a voice that suggested it had learned English from particularly boring documentaries. "I am Admiral Theaksmore of the Zentorian Imperial Fleet. Your species has reached beyond your primitive world and attracted our attention. We find your continued existence inconvenient. You have 48 hours to surrender your planet and prepare for processing. Resistance is not only futile, but mathematically improbable." "Well," Max said, staring at the screen, "this night just keeps getting better." The museum's main entrance suddenly hissed open, and Captain Rita Valdez, Luna City Museum security chief and former colonial marine, stepped inside with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested she'd rather be shooting something than dealing with paperwork. "Let me guess," she said, spotting Mac immediately. Another genius who thought breaking into a museum during first contact would be a great idea. "Hey, technically I started this heist before the aliens showed up. That's got to count for something." Rita pulled out her sidearm, though she looked more tired than threatening. "Marcus Thompson, Luna City Salvage License 47731. Currently wanted for questioning in 6 systems and defaulting on loans in 12. You really picked tonight to add breaking and entering to your resume? You know, with aliens threatening to destroy humanity, maybe we could table the arrest until after we figure out if there's going to be a species left to prosecute me." That's when Winston chimed in again. "I hate to interrupt this delightful reunion, but based on my analysis of Admiral Theaksmore's broadcast, I believe we may have a more pressing concern than Mr. Thompson's criminal activities." "Which is?" Rita asked. "The Zentorians appear to be operating under the assumption that humans are a primitive species that stumbled into space travel. Their tactics suggest they're planning a containment operation rather than total annihilation. This gives us a significant tactical advantage." "How do you figure?" Mac asked. They're underestimating us. In my extensive database of military history, underestimating one's opponent is the second most common cause of tactical failure, right after running out of ammunition. Rita holstered her weapon. All right, Winston. What do you suggest? That Mr. Thompson finish examining that Springfield rifle. I have a feeling it may become remarkably relevant very soon. And that's when the museum's security system, apparently deciding that an alien invasion was the perfect time for a software update, engaged full lockdown protocols, trapping them all inside, while the fate of humanity hung in the balance outside. Anyone else get the feeling this is going to be a long night? Mac asked, still holding the antique rifle he'd grabbed during the excitement. 6 hours later, Admiral Thexmore stood on the bridge of his flagship, the inevitable conquest, watching human military forces attempt what could charitably be called resistance and more accurately be described as an elaborate form of suicide. Commander Vextau, he clicked to his lieutenant, a nervous creature who always looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy, report on the humans' pathetic efforts. Sir, Miors. Vextau consulted his datapad while internally wondering why he'd ever left his comfortable job in Zentorian waste management. Their initial missile barrage was completely absorbed by our shields. Current damage to the fleet, 0. Current damage to their own cities from falling debris, significant. Excellent. And their directed energy weapons? Less effective than a flashlight against our hull plating, sir. Though I must admit, they're showing remarkable creativity in the frequency variations they're attempting. Thexmore's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his species. Creativity. How wonderfully primitive. These humans are exactly what our intelligence reports suggested, a species that achieves spaceflight through sheer luck rather than evolutionary superiority. Down on Earth, President Martinez was discovering that first contact protocols hadn't adequately prepared her for dealing with aliens who treated humanity like a pest control problem. General Hayes, she said during an emergency session that had been going on for so long that coffee had been replaced by intravenous caffeine drips, please tell me you have something better than throw everything we have at them and hope for the best. General Bradley Hayes, a man who'd built his career on finding solutions to impossible problems, looked like he'd met his match. Madam President, we've exhausted our conventional weapons. Nuclear weapons are off the table since they do more damage to us than them. Our most advanced plasma cannons are registering the same effect as throwing spitballs at a battleship. What about unconventional weapons? We're exploring every option, including some ideas that would have gotten me laughed out of the Pentagon yesterday. I'm even having my people examine historical precedents for defeating technologically superior forces. Back in the museum, Rita was monitoring these increasingly desperate broadcasts while Winston provided running commentary that somehow managed to be both informative and deeply annoying. You know, Winston said, this reminds me of the siege of Rorke's Drift, where 150 British soldiers held off 4,000 Zulu warriors. Of course, the technological disparity wasn't quite as dramatic as what we're facing. Winston, Rita interrupted, unless you've got a plan that doesn't involve us all dying horribly, maybe save the history lessons. Actually, Captain Valdez, I've been analyzing the Zentorian tactical patterns and I believe their confidence may be their weakness. Mac, who'd been examining the Springfield rifle with the kind of attention he usually reserved for calculating debt payments, looked up. How's that? Their shields are calibrated to deflect modern energy weapons and high-velocity kinetic projectiles. However, based on their energy signatures, I believe they may have overlooked certain, antiquated approaches to warfare. You're suggesting we attack aliens with museum pieces? Rita asked. Not attack, precisely. But consider this, every advanced civilization eventually develops defenses against advanced weapons. But how many of them prepare for primitive ones? On the main screen, Admiral Thexmore appeared again, this time with a backdrop showing Earth's moon. Specifically, the dark side of Earth's moon, which suddenly wasn't there anymore. Humans, he announced, this demonstration was intended to show you the futility of resistance. We have reduced your satellite to its component atoms to prove that your time has expired. Surrender now, or face the same fate as your moon. Max stared at the screen, his face going through several interesting color changes. That son of a bug just blew up Luna. Technically, only the dark side, Winston corrected. I grew up on Luna. Luna City, Luna Mining Station 7, Luna Transit Hub. That thing just destroyed half my childhood, and you're getting technical about it? Rita noticed something she hadn't seen before in Mac's expression, genuine anger, as opposed to his usual mixture of sarcasm and mild panic. Commander Vextal, Admiral Thexmore was saying to his lieutenant, begin final preparations for the cleansing operation. These humans clearly lack the intelligence to recognize superior force when they see it. Vextal nodded, though privately he was beginning to think the humans' refusal to surrender showed either remarkable courage or remarkable stupidity, and he wasn't sure which would be worse to face in battle. Winston, Rita said, explain this theory about primitive weapons. Gladly. You see, the Zentaurian shields operate on predictive algorithms designed to intercept incoming threats. However, their programming likely focuses on objects traveling at velocities consistent with modern weaponry. A musket ball, traveling at roughly 300 meters per second, might not register as a threat worth deflecting. You're talking about shooting aliens with a Civil War rifle, Max said. I'm talking about exploiting a gap in their defenses that they never considered worth protecting against. The broadcast continued with Thexmore's final ultimatum, you have 18 hours remaining. Use them wisely, though I suspect wisdom is not among your species' strengths. As the screen went dark, Mac hefted the Springfield rifle and looked at Rita. You know what? I'm tired of being underestimated by oversized insects. Winston, tell me more about this plan of yours.
General Hayes arrived at the Luna City Museum 7 hours later, looking like a man who'd aged a decade in a day. The museum had been converted into an improvised command center, partly because its position offered a clear view of the Zentaurian fleet, and partly because it was the only building in Luna City with a coffee machine still functional after the moon's partial destruction.
Captain Valdez, he said, nodding to Rita while eyeing Mac with the expression of someone who'd read a very long criminal file. I understand you may have some unconventional ideas about our situation. Actually, sir, the ideas belong to Winston, Rita replied. Our resident AI historian has some theories about historical warfare that might apply to our current predicament. At this point, I'd listen to tactical advice from a fortune cookie if it might help. What's the theory? Winston's speakers crackled to life with obvious enthusiasm. General Hayes, delighted to meet you. I've studied your tactical innovations in the Martian Rebellion, particularly your use of adapted mining equipment as improvised weapons. Brilliant work. Thanks. Now what's this about primitive weapons? Consider, if you will, the Battle of Agincourt, 1415. French knights, representing the most advanced military technology of their era, were defeated by English longbowmen using weapons that hadn't significantly changed in centuries. Or take the Soviet-Afghan War, where mujahideen armed with 19th century rifles consistently outmaneuvered one of the world's most advanced militaries. Hayes rubbed his temples. I'm familiar with asymmetric warfare, Winston, but we're talking about aliens with shields that can deflect nuclear weapons. Precisely my point. Their shields are designed to deflect nuclear weapons, plasma cannons, and kinetic projectiles traveling at several kilometers per second. But what about a projectile traveling at a mere 300 meters per second? Mac held up the Springfield rifle. He's talking about this antique. Apparently, black powder weapons are so primitive that alien technology doesn't consider them worth stopping. General Hayes stared at the rifle like it was either humanity's salvation or the setup for the galaxy's worst joke. You're suggesting we fight a space fleet with Civil War weapons. One weapon, Winston corrected. This particular Springfield comes with a single original cartridge, loaded with black powder and a .58 caliber mini-ball. Never fired in anger, according to its provenance. Great. One shot against an entire alien fleet. Those are terrible odds, even by my standards. Rita pulled up a holographic display showing the Zentorian flagship. Winston's been analyzing their ship configurations. Tell him what you found. Every vessel, regardless of its technological advancement, maintains certain structural vulnerabilities. The Zentorians, despite their superior shielding, still require reactor cores to power their ships. And like most civilizations, they've placed their primary reactor exhaust ports in locations that provide optimal energy flow. The display zoomed in on a section of the flagship's hull, highlighting a small circular opening barely visible among the ship's massive superstructure. You're talking about shooting that tiny target from how far away? Hayes asked. Approximately 2.3 kilometers, accounting for the approach vector we'd need to avoid their primary weapon systems. With a rifle that was considered accurate to maybe 500 meters when it was new, 160 years ago. The mathematics are challenging, Winston admitted, but not impossible. Especially considering that Mr. Thompson has experience with precision salvage work requiring steady hands and accurate judgment. Max snorted. My experience is cutting apart derelict ships with plasma torches, not threading needles with antique weapons. However, Winston continued, you do have experience operating in zero gravity, calculating trajectories for moving objects and working under pressure. These skills are remarkably transferable. Up on the Zentorian flagship, Commander Vextal was monitoring human communications with growing unease. His translation protocols were picking up references to historical precedents and unconventional tactics, which, in his experience, usually meant someone was about to do something extremely stupid or extremely clever. Admiral, he reported, the humans appear to be researching past military conflicts involving technological disparities. Let them research, Thexmore replied dismissively. Their primitive histories contain no weapons capable of threatening Zentorian shields. Continue monitoring, but focus on their surrender preparations. Vextal nodded, though privately he'd learned that when desperate beings started studying their own military history, it usually meant they were planning something that would either end very badly or very surprisingly. Back in the museum, General Hayes was staring at tactical projections that seemed to exist somewhere between brilliant and insane. Let me understand this correctly, he said. We're going to disguise a salvage ship as space debris, drift it close to the flagship, and hope that a 160-year-old rifle can hit a target the size of a dinner plate from over 2 kilometers away.
That's the plan, Rita confirmed.
And if we miss? Then humanity gets processed by alien overlords, Max said cheerfully. But hey, at least we'll go down in history as the species that tried to win a space war with a museum piece. Hayes looked around the room at the assembled group, a career criminal, a security guard, an AI with an obsession for military trivia, and himself, a general whose best plan involved equipment that predated powered flight. You know what? He said. I've had worse ideas. Winston, start calculating trajectory data. Captain Valdez, get me everything you can on Mr. Thompson's salvage ship. And Thompson? Yeah? I hope you're a better shot than you are a thief. General, I'm about to find out. 12 hours later, the Lucky Strike sat in Luna City's salvage bay, surrounded by enough military hardware to stock a small war. While Winston uploaded himself into a portable processing unit that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd seen too many science fiction movies. I still can't believe we're doing this, Rita said, running final checks on the ship's systems. We're literally betting the survival of humanity on a plan that involves 19th century ballistics. Hey, Mac protested, it's not just 19th century ballistics. It's also 22nd century stupidity and 23rd century desperation. That's got to count for something. General Hayes appeared on the ship's communication screen, broadcasting from the emergency command center they'd established in what used to be Luna City's shopping mall. "Thompson, are you sure about your ship's stealth capabilities?" "The Lucky Strike's been flying under various authorities' radar for 15 years. She's not much to look at, but she can mimic the electromagnetic signature of space debris better than anything in the official fleet." "That's because she practically is space debris," Rita muttered. "I heard that, and technically she's salvaged components arranged in a configuration that merely resembles space debris while maintaining full operational capability." Winston's portable unit lit up with indicators that somehow managed to look smug. "Gentlemen, lady, I've completed trajectory calculations for 17 different approach vectors. The optimal path involves using the debris field from the moon's destruction as cover, which provides both concealment and a certain poetic justice." "Explain," Hayes said. "Admiral Theaksmore destroyed part of Luna to demonstrate his power. We're going to use the resulting debris field to get close enough to destroy his flagship. There's a psychological element here that I find deeply satisfying." On the Zentorian flagship, Commander Vextal was struggling with what he'd come to recognize as respect for human tenacity. His monitoring systems had picked up references to something called Operation Musketball, which sounded both ridiculous and ominous. "Sir," he reported to Admiral Theaksmore, "human communications continue to reference unconventional tactical approaches. Should we adjust our defensive postures?" "Commander, their most advanced weapons cannot penetrate our shields. What possible threat could their unconventional tactics represent? Continue monitoring, but do not waste resources on defensive adjustments." Vextal acknowledged the order while privately noting that every military disaster in Zentorian history had begun with the phrase, "What possible threat could they represent?" Back on the Lucky Strike, Mac was discovering that loading a black powder rifle in zero gravity presented unique challenges that Civil War soldiers had never needed to consider. Carefully, Rita coached. Watching him measure the powder charge, Winston's calculations assume exact specifications for the original cartridge. "The powder is 160 years old," Mac pointed out. "How do we know it'll even fire?" "Black powder, properly stored, can remain stable for centuries," Winston replied. "This particular cartridge was preserved in a climate-controlled environment specifically to maintain its historical integrity."
Great. So we're betting humanity's survival on a museum's air conditioning system?
"Actually," Winston said, "we're betting on human ingenuity, historical precedent, and the fundamental principle that complex systems always have simple failure points." General Hayes reappeared on screen. "Thompson, are you ready for launch?" Mac looked at the Springfield rifle, then at Rita, then at Winston's processing unit, then back at the rifle. "General, I've been ready for a lot of stupid things in my life, but this might be the stupidest." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." Lucky Strike requesting departure clearance. "Granted. And Thompson, good luck." The salvage ship detached from Luna City's docking bay and began its drift toward the Zentorian fleet, powered down to minimal systems and broadcasting the electronic signature of a chunk of moon rock with delusions of grandeur. "Time to target?" Mac asked. 47 minutes, Winston replied. "Might I suggest using this time to practice your shooting stance? I've uploaded several historical manuals on 19th century marksmanship." "Winston, I'm about to attempt the most important shot in human history using a weapon older than powered flight while floating in space. I really don't think marksmanship manuals are going to help. Nevertheless, proper form is essential for accurate shooting. Did you know that Civil War soldiers were trained to fire 3 rounds per minute with these rifles? We've got 1 round for the next 1,000 years, so I think we can skip the speed training." Rita checked their approach vector. "Mac, you do realize that if this works, you'll go down in history as the man who saved humanity with an antique. And if it doesn't work, then we'll go down as the idiots who thought they could win a space war with a museum piece." Either way, Winston added cheerfully, "it should make for an interesting historical footnote." The lucky strike drifted through the debris field toward humanity's last, best, and most ridiculous hope for survival, carrying 3 unlikely heroes and 1 very old rifle toward a date with destiny that nobody in their right mind would have believed possible. The lucky strike drifted through the debris field like just another piece of Luna's remains, her engines cold and her crew barely breathing as they approached the Zentorian flagship. Through the viewports, the alien dreadnought loomed like a metal cathedral designed by someone with serious anger management issues. Distance to target. Winston whispered through the ship's internal systems, 800 meters in closing. Mac floated near the main viewport, the Springfield rifle secured to his shoulder with improvised straps that Rita had fashioned from emergency restraints. The weapon felt absurdly heavy and impossibly light at the same time, a paradox that seemed appropriate for their situation. "I can see the exhaust port," he said quietly. "It's smaller than it looked in the holograms." "Approximately 2.7 meters in diameter," Winston confirmed. "At our current distance, it represents an angular target of roughly 0.2 degrees. In non-computer speak, it's like trying to hit a coin from across a football field." "Thanks, Winston. That's exactly what I needed to hear right now." Rita monitored their drift trajectory while keeping one eye on the Zentorian ship's sensor arrays. "Any sign they've detected us?" "Negative. We're registering as debris with a mass of approximately 40 tons, which matches several pieces of Luna's former geography currently in our vicinity." On the bridge of the inevitable conquest, Admiral Thexmore was preparing his final ultimatum to humanity, but completely unaware that Salvation was floating toward his ship disguised as a chunk of moon rock with an attitude problem. "Commander Vextal, open a channel to all human settlements. It's time to end this pathetic display of defiance." Vextal activated the communication array while simultaneously monitoring the dozens of small objects drifting through the debris field around their ship. His sensors tagged them all as harmless detritus, but something about the whole situation felt wrong in a way he couldn't quite identify. "Channel open, Admiral."
Thexmore's image appeared on screens throughout the solar system, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. "Humans, your time has expired. We offered you the opportunity to surrender with minimal processing. That offer is now withdrawn. Prepare for immediate molecular dissolution." In the lucky strike, Mac adjusted his position and tried to remember everything Winston had told him about Civil War marksmanship, which wasn't much since most of it involved standing on solid ground and shooting at targets that weren't surrounded by alien warships. "Wind calculation?" he asked.
"We're in space, Mr. Thompson. There is no wind."
"Right. Gravity?" "Luna's remaining gravitational influence will cause a deflection of approximately 0.003 degrees over the projectile's flight path. Target movement? The inevitable conquest is maintaining station-keeping thrusters. Minimal drift well within acceptable parameters." Mac sighted down the rifle's iron sights, a technology that seemed laughably primitive in an age of computer-guided weapon systems, but was exactly what the situation required. The exhaust port appeared as a small dark circle against the flagship's hull, barely visible among the ship's complex superstructure. "Distance 200 meters, Rita reported. We're as close as we're getting without triggering their proximity sensors." On the Zentorian bridge, Commander Vextal noticed something that made his sensory organs tingle with unease. "Admiral, I'm detecting a slight energy signature from debris object 47. "Debris objects do not emit energy signatures, Commander." "Yes, sir, that's what concerns me." But Admiral Thexmore was focused on his victory speech and dismissed his lieutenant's worries with an irritated click of his mandibles. In the lucky strike, Max studied his breathing and tried to ignore the fact that he was about to attempt the most important shot in human history with a weapon that had been obsolete when his great-great-great-grandfather was young. "I knew." "Winston, any final advice?" "Squeeze the trigger gently, Mr. Thompson. Don't jerk it. And remember, you're not just shooting for yourself or even for humanity. You're shooting for every underdog who ever faced impossible odds and decided to try anyway." That's either very inspiring or completely insane. In my experience, the difference is often negligible. Mac's finger found the trigger, a piece of metal that had been waiting 160 years for this moment. The irony wasn't lost on him that humanity's most advanced enemy was about to be defeated by its most primitive weapon. Time seemed to slow as he applied pressure to the trigger. The ancient firing mechanism engaged with a click that sounded absurdly loud in the ship's silence, followed by the distinctive thump of black powder igniting. The Springfield rifle fired with a small puff of white smoke and a recoil that pushed Mac against his restraints. The .58 caliber mini ball left the barrel at 300 meters per second, a velocity so slow by modern standards that it barely registered as movement to anyone watching. But the Zentaurian shields, programmed to deflect objects traveling at several kilometers per second, didn't even notice the small piece of lead drifting toward the flagship like a particularly determined dust mote. Commander Vextal was still arguing with his admiral about the suspicious debris when his instruments detected an impact on the main reactor exhaust port. A tiny impact, barely registering on their sensors, like a pebble hitting a mountain. Admiral, he said, confused, something just struck the reactor exhaust. That's when the inevitable Conquest's main reactor, breached by a 160-year-old musket ball, began a cascade failure that turned the pride of the Zentaurian fleet into the galaxy's most expensive firework display. The explosion was visible from Earth, a brilliant star that flared and faded, taking with it Admiral Thexmore's dreams of conquest in humanity's darkest hour. In the lucky strike, Max stared at the expanding debris field that had been the enemy flagship, the smoking Springfield rifle still in his hands. Winston, he said quietly, did we just win a space war with a Civil War rifle? Indeed we did, Mr. Thompson. Indeed we did. The destruction of the inevitable conquest had an immediate effect on the remaining Zentaurian fleet that could best be described as profound confusion followed by rapid departure. Commander Vextal, suddenly finding himself in command of 17 dreadnoughts and no clear explanation for how humans had destroyed their flagship with what appeared to be a historical curiosity, and made the tactical decision that would save both his career and his species' reputation. All ships, he broadcast to the fleet, initiate strategic withdrawal. Immediate hyperspace jump to rally point 7. His bridge crew stared at him with the kind of bewilderment usually reserved for beings who just watched the laws of physics take an unexpected coffee break. Sir, his tactical officer clicked nervously. Shouldn't we investigate the weapon that destroyed the flagship? Officer Kexnar, Vextal replied with the wisdom that comes from serving under commanders who don't survive first contact with human ingenuity. There are some mysteries that are better left unsolved, especially when solving them might result in our own ships being destroyed by whatever impossible thing the humans do next. Before departing, he transmitted a brief message toward Earth. Commander Vextal of the Zentaurian fleet to human leadership. We acknowledge your unexpected tactical capabilities. The Zentaurian Empire will reconsider its assessment of human civilization. We suggest future diplomatic contact through proper channels. It was as close to an apology as interstellar politics would allow. Back on Luna, President Martinez found herself facing the strangest press conference in human history, trying to explain to the galactic media how Earth had defeated an advanced alien invasion using what the headlines were already calling the shot heard round the solar system. So let me understand this correctly, asked Amanda Torres from Humanity's survival depended on a salvage operator, a security guard, an AI historian, and a rifle from the American Civil War. That's essentially accurate, President Martinez replied, looking like someone who'd signed up to run a planet and found herself managing a cosmic joke instead. And this rifle was fired once? Once. Yeah. And that single shot destroyed an entire alien flagship? Apparently, yes. Madam President, with respect, that sounds completely insane. General Hayes, standing beside the president, allowed himself a rare smile. Ma'am, you just described the entire history of human military innovation. We have a talent for making the impossible look easy in retrospect. Meanwhile, Mac found himself back at the Luna City Museum, though this time as humanity's most unlikely hero rather than its most incompetent burglar. The Springfield rifle now occupied the place of honor in the main hall, displayed under a placard reading one shot, one kill, one planet saved. I still can't believe it worked, he said to Rita, who'd been promoted to head something called the Department of Unconventional Warfare, uh, a position that apparently involved preparing for future alien encounters using humanity's extensive collection of obsolete weapons. Winston calculated the odds at approximately 2,847 to 1 against, Rita replied, which, according to human military history, makes it almost inevitable that we'd succeed. Winston, now permanently installed as the museum's senior military consultant and official hero of Earth, was giving tours to visitors from across the solar system who wanted to see the weapon that had ended humanity's first interstellar war. The key insight he was explaining to a group of wide-eyed school children is that advanced civilizations often overlook simple solutions. The Zentaurians spent so much effort preparing for sophisticated weapons that they never considered defending against primitive ones. One young girl raised her hand. Mr. Winston, does this mean old things are better than new things? Not necessarily, my dear, but it does mean that sometimes the oldest solutions are exactly what new problems need. The universe has a sense of humor, and it particularly enjoys proving that the impossible is just another word for something nobody's tried yet. 6 months later, Earth's Primitive Weapons Division had become the most requested posting in the United Defense Force, staffed by historians, archaeologists, and military engineers who spent their time figuring out how ancient weapons might defeat futuristic enemies. Mac, who'd parlayed his 15 minutes of galactic fame into a legitimate salvage business specializing in historical artifact recovery, occasionally returned to the museum to visit Winston and the rifle that had made him famous. Any regrets? Winston asked during one of these visits. About saving humanity? Not really. Though I do miss the days when my biggest problem was avoiding Jimmy the Wrench and his enthusiasm for kneecap restructuring. And now I'm the guy who proved that sometimes the best way to solve a 23rd century problem is with a 19th century solution. There are worse legacies to have. The Springfield rifle sat in its case, cleaned and restored but never again loaded, a monument to the principle that had defined humanity since its earliest days when faced with impossible odds and superior enemies. Humans don't give up. They get creative. As Winston often noted in his increasingly popular lectures on military history, the galaxy had learned an important lesson about humanity that day. It wasn't that humans were the most advanced species, or the most powerful, or even the most intelligent, but they were definitely the most stubborn. And in a universe full of beings who'd learned to trust in the superiority of advanced technology, sometimes stubborn was exactly what victory required. The memorial plaque beside the rifle's display case summed up the entire affair with characteristic human understatement. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Sometimes the impossible is just improbable. And sometimes one shot really is all you need. Below that, in smaller text that Winston had insisted on adding, especially if it's fired by someone too stubborn to know when they're beaten. Earth had announced its presence to the galaxy not with advanced technology or superior firepower, but with the simple, enduring truth that had carried humanity from caves to the stars. When everything else fails, try something nobody expects. It was, as Winston frequently observed, the most human solution to an inhuman problem that anyone could have imagined. And somewhere in the depths of space, Commander Vextal filed a report with Centaurian Command that would become required reading at their military academy. When facing humans in combat, prepare for advanced weapons, superior tactics, and overwhelming force. Then prepare for them to win with something you never saw coming. The age of human galactic diplomacy had begun with a 160-year-old rifle and a man who'd never met a debt he could pay on time. It was, everyone agreed, exactly how humanity would have wanted it to start.